And good evening, everyone. The Ospreys welcome us back here to McDuff Lives on my YouTube channel. I'm John O'Loughlin, and tonight we have another edition of Monday Night with Garland Nixon. And Garland's here with us already on the screen, and he's got everything all set up at the studio. And so we are ready and raring to go. Good evening, Garland Nixon. How are you?
Great, John. Great to talk to you again, man. I really enjoy our Monday night conversations.
Well, it certainly is fun, and I think one of the main reasons it's fun is because it's isn't it great to just find somebody that you could just hear something and you say, "Yeah, that's right. Gosh, you said just what I wanted to say."
Yeah, yes, I really enjoy it. It's funny because, when you talk to people who are kind of getting a feeling of how things are working, you find like this massive rejection of the mainstream media. That's how I know I can talk to somebody when they're like, "Oh, geez, Dad, yeah, I don't want anything to do with that." I'm like, "Okay, I think we can talk."
Yeah, I know. Some people try to get my opinion on the George Floyd case, and I say I don't follow the George Floyd case. I don't really have an opinion on it. That's just a big media thing, and whatever happened. The main thing that happened is the entire country got distracted for a major amount of time, and that's what the media does. I'm not saying there's anything one way or the other about the actual case, but it's something that I thought, well, I don't really need to follow that because I don't think that that's going to lead me to uncover any great facts about what's really going on in the world. So that's why I don't look at mainstream media generally because I just don't have any hope. I don't think I run out of hopium.
Yeah, well, and you find what happens that even let's say, you watch whatever it is, the George Floyd, whatever, you watch it, and you're a person like me. You want to find out what the facts are. You want to find out what the issues are. You want real news. And you turn on one channel, they're editorializing it one way. This group is all bad, that group is all good. You go to the next channel, they're editorializing it the other way. No, you're wrong. It's that group that's bad and this group is good. So it's like I always say, I'd like to turn on the news and find out there was maybe an explosion somewhere. Maybe there was a twister touchdown. Maybe there's, remember when you turned on news and there was things that happened that were in the news? Now it's not news. It's just like we had 4 years of Trump bad. We had 4 years of Russiagate or whatever it is. And there are those of us who just, I'd like to, it's not even news anymore. You know what I mean? It's like some morning shock jock show disguised as news. I can't watch that crap.
I see that NPR came out with a retraction of its claim that the Hunter Biden laptop story had been debunked by the intelligence agencies. And nobody cares anymore. I mean, it's like they don't care that a major election issue was lied about by NPR, because you either watch NPR or you don't. But that Hunter Biden laptop was a major wedge issue, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that as Hunter Biden's prosecution moves along.
One of the interesting things about that, we could do a whole show on that whole Hunter Biden thing. One of the interesting things about that, and think about this, there is an investigation going on, ostensibly, allegedly, there's an investigation going on by the Fed, by the feds into this guy, Hunter Biden. So he releases a book and he goes on like the talk circuit. There is no attorney in the world that would ever, I'm going to use the word allow that, you know what I mean? That would ever be like, oh, sure, fine, go to his client who's under investigation. Talk about all this stuff. No, every attorney in the world is going to be, nope, don't say nothing. You wait till this thing is over. Wait till the investigation's over. You could be digging your own grave here. But it seems to me that the level of hubris that is being shown with Hunter Biden being under an investigation and feeling so free to just come out and talk about the stuff that's being looked at in the investigation, it seems to me, it's almost like he already knows nothing's going to happen to him. You know what I mean? It's almost like he already knows, hey, you know what? They ain't going to touch me. My dad's president. What are they going to do? So he's just like, I was using crack. I was doing it. He admitted to violating the law. Now, I'm a person who I do believe that people who have, substance abuse is in fact, kind of like an illness and that should be treated like a health issue. but my point being, the hubris to come out while you're under investigation and just pretend like you're untouchable, probably because he is.
That's right. Probably because he is, and was that not one of the great impetuses of the election being so strongly contested? And for those of us that think we witnessed some very blatant election fraud in a few key states, it's a motivating factor, because if Trump had gotten reelected and this prosecution was ongoing, I think the whole Biden family would be in severe jeopardy.
And as I've said, if I had my choices, I'm a lefty guy. If you said, Garland, who do Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn or somebody, that's who I am. I'm unapologetic about it, right? However, I do believe in democracy, and to me, to wait to find out whether a person is really believes in democracy, you got to ask them this: are you willing to lose? Are you willing to go with your principles, to go with toe to toe with the other candidate, whoever it is, to have an honest election? And then if you lose, you lost. I'm going to make the point that my policies are better. The other person's going to make their point that their policies are better. And if you win or you lose, if you lose, you just say to yourself, well, we didn't work hard enough. We're going to work the next 4 years and they'll vote for it. That's what democracy is all about. This thing that we have, where we watched these people for 4 years tell us that, pictures of buff Bernie, a cartoon picture of Bernie Sanders with a muscle body painted 4 different colors, that the Russians ran that picture of buff Bernie and crap like that, and that overturned the election. People who told us that crap for 4 years, but yet when it came time that they wanted their guy to win, they were willing to lie, manipulate the system. NPR is a perfect example. What NPR did is they wrote in an article that the intelligence agencies had debunked, the word they used was, had discredited the Hunter Biden laptop story. First of all, I don't even know what that means. What part of the story? But at any rate, and they had to come back later and insert a correction, a retraction that said, no, they didn't. Well, why'd you even write it in the first place? And then Hunter Biden goes on TV, and it was just a joke. It was laughable. The person was asking him, the interviewer was asking him, yes, was that your laptop? He's like, well, could be. I don't know. Could be Russian intelligence. Could be. I got a laptop in front of me. I put everything on this laptop. I know whether this is my laptop. Every laptop I've ever had. I've had 3 laptops at a time. I remember I had a work laptop. I had a laptop that I just used for downloads and stuff like that in case and I had a laptop that I used for, doing stuff online that was serious, right? I knew all that. There's nobody who's going to be like, nah, you got pictures of yourself on this laptop smoking crack, pictures of yourself on the laptop, your emails, all of that, and you don't know. It's laughable. And here's the problem, the part that, okay, what he said is laughable. You're an attorney and you know this. Where's the cross-examination? When someone says that to you or me, or anybody with half a brain, and they say, oh yeah, I don't know if it's that laptop, you have to ask some follow-up questions. Wait a minute. What about this, and this was on the laptop? Are you saying that your pictures of you, videos, sex videos of you were on the laptop, your emails were on everything's on that laptop, taken with the laptop, and you're saying that you don't think it was your laptop? But no follow-up whatsoever. And that's why, you talk about election interference, and firstly, I didn't want either one of them to win because I didn't like either one of them. But my point is, I wanted a fair election. And that was clearly election interference, what they did in openly, unapologetically suppressing the Hunter Biden story, because they knew it would hurt Joe Biden, and it would have. It was a bad story. It was bad. You didn't want that out the week before, and they wouldn't touch it. Oh, can you imagine? Let me add this. Can you imagine if that had been Trump and his kid? It's all you would have saw 24/7.
And a little while ago, you said, that you see these things come out and you hear one side say this and one side say that. But in a lot of these cases, it's no longer, there's no longer this hair pulling between, these two, you know, polar opposites that are always, in the food fight against each other. Nobody's pursuing these stories. Neither side is pursuing these stories, and that is really should send chills down people's spines, because we are approaching a Orwellian control through not only through the surveillance of everyone, but also the absolute control over the message, the narrative. I've seen it called, and the narrative is kind of run by what you and I call the blob right now, and it's, gosh, we've lost control, if we ever had it, of the message of the American people. Even though the American people trust their media, they trust these people. They trust the media. Why do they trust the media? I have no idea, except for that the media is just really, really good at subtle mind control techniques.
Yeah, one of the a perfect example of that is right now, and it's a different story, but it's the Ukraine story. Right now, on Russia's border, and keeping in mind, and this is what I always have to bring up: Russia and in the United States have 95% of all nukes on the earth are these two countries. So, and I mean, Russia has a massive, very powerful, very high tech army, and um, on the Ukraine border, on the Russia borders, Ukraine, and the U.S. has basically, the Biden team has basically, for those who don't know, there is an area right on the Russian, between Russia and Ukraine, where the people there, it's called the Donbass region, the two republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, and the people there are Russian speaking. And a lot of the Ukrainians don't like the Russian speaking people. You got to understand that the speaker of the parliament in Ukraine personally started two neo-Nazi parties. Okay, Ukraine, they've got several people in their parliament who literally are unabashed neo-Nazis. So they hate Russians. And so the line for the Eastern Ukraine area, the Donbass area where the Russian people speak, basically these Ukrainians have been besieging them, firing mortars and rounds in. There's kind of like almost a civil war going on there. There's about 14,000 people have died, bottom line. But the Russians have said they're Russian speaking people. 20% of them have dual citizenship. And the Russians are like, look, we ain't going to start no trouble, but we're not going to let you kill all of these, just come in and wipe out the Russian speaking people on our borders. Not happening. And let me add this. No Russian leader could maintain power in his country if he did. Can you imagine if the U.S. in Mexico had a big area where there was a couple million people and they just let somebody come in and wipe out all the Americans? Everybody Americans say, no, you got to defend these people. You can't just let, a hostile force kill them all. Okay, that's where the Russians sit. And everybody knows if you go in and you're going to kill all these Russian speaking people, the Russians are going to step in and stop it. So the crazy, insane Biden people now have got the Ukrainians basically to put all of these troops along the border, and they're looking as though they're going to attack or invade. Meanwhile, also, might I add, Crimea, which is, again, Russian-speaking people. They've said, they put all of these troops around there, and they've said, they actually have a bill to reunify in the Rada, which is their Congress, that says they will reunify Ukraine and they will bring that area and Crimea back. And the Russians ain't giving up Crimea no matter what. They're not giving it up. So, and here's where they are. We know that nothing like that happened. Joe Biden comes in with his bunch of insane lunatics, and within 2.5 months, the Ukrainians are now lined up along the edge. And if they do, the Russians will crush them. We're talking about the Russian army. If they are stupid enough to listen to what the U.S. did, the Russians will. The Russians said, if you do this, Ukraine will be destroyed. Now, I don't know that they mean they're going to crush it, which they could, but they could just mean we're going to break that area off. If you are going to attack those people, we'll just take that area of Ukraine where Russians speaking people off, and we'll just defend that area as part of our territory. Whatever they mean, it's very dangerous. If you look at the Biden administration people, they've done that. Let me add a couple other things. What else have they done? So right now we've got all these troops on the border of like basically Russia, like they're ready to fire. And Joe Biden called them, or they called Joe Biden, and he said the U.S. supports you. As if do you want to go to war? Do you want your kids, your neighbors, your friends going to war over a country, Ukraine, that most Americans could never find on the map and know nothing about it, and it's on Russia's border? And if Joe Biden says, "Oh, we're going to send troops and engage," that's it. Because reason being, there has never been a war game between the U.S. and Russia or the U.S. and China that didn't end in nuclear war. We know how this ends. So the Biden team right now has the world on the edge. If some idiot from Ukraine, if they fire a missile or something into the Russian area or something, and the Russians say, okay, that's it, they're attacking us, they're going to crush them. And they may go all the way to Kiev. I'm not saying that they will. They could. This is the Russian military. If they wanted to take Ukraine, it wouldn't take long. So now what is the U.S. going to do then? Are we at war with Russia? And Russia and China are allies? Is it World War III? It's very dangerous. Meanwhile, and I'll finish with two other things real quick, but I got to put these three together. In Syria, the Biden team is moving more and more soldiers, more and more war material into Syria. They bombed Syria. This is in 2 months. Meanwhile, right now, on the border of Venezuela, the Colombians are now crossing the border and having firefights with the Venezuelans. And of course, they got oil. So, of course, the Biden people want to overthrow Venezuela. So in 2 months, this guy's got us, and Americans, as you said, don't even know it. There are firefights going on, and everybody knows it's the CIA's behind it. So they've got war going on the Colombia-Venezuela border. They're on the edge of war on the Russian border. They're threatening China, all around China, and they're bringing in more troops into Syria. He's now pretty much said he didn't leave in Afghanistan. We will be lucky. How? This is 2 months. How are we going to get through 4 years of these lunatics?
I think the drive to take down Biden is going to gather steam quickly. I've seen some foreign news people. I think actually somebody on BBC's question whether he is competent to execute the office due to his mental condition, and that's going to just keep getting worse. That's not going to make anything better on the foreign policy front, because it's all seems to be run by the behind the scenes cabal that we speak of, and it's not going to make any difference if Vice President Harris becomes the president in terms of foreign policy, except for she has nowhere near the depth of the real Joe Biden. The Joe Biden when he was effective, when he was mentally there, but I don't see him as being even a participant in decision making. I think he's just there to sign things and make little short speeches and try not to screw up too bad. So yeah, it's desperate, and the media is complicit. And spending all the time, all the ink on something like a George Floyd trial is very convenient to covering up the foreign adventures that are being engaged in by us, by the American people, without really our knowledge, and certainly without our Congress saying, "Hey, let's go to war with Ukraine," or let's see if we can call Putin's bluff. Let's put some forces on alert right next to Russia. Let's just play with Putin for a while. That's the American people speaking through their Congress. No, I don't think that's what we said. I think the American people over and over and over again have wanted peace. We deserve peace. Our greatest generation fought and died for peace. We have had so many wars since then, but in the name of peace. Well, peace is at hand if we will simply seek the diplomatic solution and sit down with Russia and China and say, here's what we're going to do. You take care of this, we'll take care of that. You guys can have this, we can do this. We'll work out this little border dispute, and we're all going to stand down and rebuild our civil economies, our civil culture, our respect for one another, and set up a life that's going to be good for our children and our grandchildren to live, and that they'll be grateful to us instead of curse us, as I think they would do with the world we'd be leaving them right now. The American people want peace. It's these people that are in this blob that are behind the scenes, and we try to identify. NATO, Atlantic Council, anything that's involved in that is also going to be found involved in these incredible investments in pipelines that need to have, governments changed here and people removed from there, and just little technical things to them, but human disasters if you happen to be a Syrian or a Yemeni or an Israeli or of the Palestinian origin. There's so many examples. I hesitate to mention one because there's oppressed people in every corner of the earth, and that is all the result of this banking policy that creates and maintains scarcity, that causes people to have to struggle between one another for rare resources that should be plentiful, for clean water that should be everywhere, and for the right to grow your family in peace.
Yeah. And see, and so what do we do? I'd like to, if you don't mind, tie two things together, because the game that the US plays externally and internally is the same game. And what is it? It's this false morality. In the external world, it's human rights, right? We right now, and I say we, our country right now is doing some of the most heinous things on earth. We're starving the people of Syria, literally starving the people of Syria, literally starving the people of Venezuela. We're like, we don't like your country or your government, or maybe you got a lot of oil and we would kind of like to get our mitts on that. We're going to make a lot of other excuses, but we're putting these draconian sanctions on human beings. I've been to Venezuela. I've been to countries that are under siege by the US sanctions, and it's not a pretty sight. You can barely get decent food in these places. These people live, and you leave and you feel guilty and you're like, my God, these people still have to live with this. And I get to go home and eat well and live well. And even if you've got money in those countries, you can't buy stuff. They're literally starving people, and they're doing that. People who, you're a diabetic and you need to get insulin, I'm sorry, you're dead. In Syria, in Venezuela, and many more countries, right? So we're doing these heinous acts, and then Tony Blinken and these guys are running around talking about we're doing human rights. So the whole human rights crap is nothing but a lie. It's nothing but a falsehood. It's the opposite of what we're doing, so that we can manipulate the world to get what we want, right? But let me go inside, interior. The identity politics. It's the same game, right? Because if you want, forget human rights or identity politics. If you're there for morals, what you want is equality. Everybody should have the same expectation of rights. No one person should have a higher expectation of rights than others. That's equality. And if you say that, wouldn't you have to say every country? Wouldn't you say, sure, we're big and we have a big military, but we believe in equality. We respect the sovereignty of even the smallest country. It's a sovereign nation. They got a right to decide how to run their country. That's equality, right? In America, this identity politics crap. So what they'll say is, well, isn't this great? We have a black vice president. That doesn't mean anything. Why? Because that black vice president has policies, has an ideology, has things that she believes in. Do I agree with them? Do I not agree with them? And it's a weapon. As a black person, I feel like they use black people as a human shield. It's like, well, gee, if we put somebody in this position with these policies, you'd never be happy. You'd reject that. Oh, I know. We'll put a black person in there with the same horrible policies, or, a woman, or you fill in the blank, a gay person, whatever it happens, whatever fits the bill. And they will give you those same terrible politics, but they'll just put a face, well, you can't very well oppose this woman, male, gay person, whatever the case may be, because then that would make you evil. So the identity politics are just as much of a fraud as the human rights, because it's anti-intellectual. It's anti-critical thinking. Critical thinking is, if I'm going to vote for somebody, does this person's policy suite of policies. I always say, Garland's got like a suite of policies that he believes in. Does my group of policies align with this particular person, right? If it does, I vote for him. I don't care if it's male, straight, gay, white, male, whatever. If their policies align with mine, it's in my best interest to vote for them. Maybe I'll get what I want. But the identity politics game says no, 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 no. Let's be anti-intellectuals and let's vote on something that is in no way related to policy. That's not going to make your life better or worse. If you want a policy, forget that. And that's what we do. The human rights the same way. Critical thinking is, do all countries have a right to sovereignty? That's something I believe in. I don't care. I'm a lefty. What do I want? I want left-wing politics. But if a country votes for right-wing politics, it's their country. It ain't none of my business, long as they don't mess with me. That's not how our empire works. And that's the fraud that they play inside and outside, both of them. Human rights is a lie, or they say they're fighting corruption. But I've noticed this. The countries that they work for human rights in, or they're fighting corruption, always seem to have a lot of oil. Maybe that, they need democracy. Or something. Lithium is in Bolivia. They got something we need. Or Ukraine sitting right on the border of Russia. We've always got some flimsy excuse that's wholly as Swiss cheese to take over a country for good moral reasons. But when you look at the country, there's always a very, very high strategic interest in it. So it's all a fraud. I just want to get that in there.
Well, let me just go on top of that, because I think I don't have any issue with what you said. I want to just keep going from there and say this: the empire. Okay, can people perceive that there is an empire? Because the empire doesn't have national boundaries. They only have economic boundaries, and one of the biggest economic boundaries they run into is Russia. And so if they want to run a pipeline through a country, let's say Syria, for example, and they need to get, that country to comply, well, the empire is going to go to Syria and say, hey, we need your space. We're going to put a pipeline through here. And Syria says, well, no, I've actually been working with Russia for quite a few years now, many decades, and they don't actually want you to put a pipeline through there. And I can see why, frankly, because if you put your pipeline through there, then you're going to sell all your stuff to Europe, and Europe is my main customer. I need
exactly
to sell my gas to. So if I let you put your pipeline through there, then I'm not only going to lose Russia as a friend, I'm going to lose my sovereignty, because you are then going to be taking over the way this country goes because of all the money that's going to be running through that pipeline. So I will lose my sovereignty if I cooperate with you. Russia will lose its income and its sovereignty eventually, and which is the big game plan, right? So
Yep.
the empire is what's doing this. It's not the United States' interest that's doing this. It's the interest of this supranational empire that expresses itself through global corporations like Exxon and Target and, 100 big brands, some of which are being subjected, hopefully, to a boycott right now, such as Coca-Cola, because of their policy that has to do with football games, I think it is. But that bigger picture, though, is what I'm kind of like. Think of the empire as this envelope that wants to envelop all of the nations and then just kind of dissolve the differences. And that really gets into the energy policy thing that's going on, which is perhaps what all of this noise and stuff and threats and all is really about, is covering up the fact that, and as the Schiller Institute people have pointed out dramatically, we are closing down our power supply. We are shutting down our coal and our nuclear at a very large rate. And things like what happened in Texas over the winter and California the last winter are going to get worse and worse. And as they implement their Green New Deal policy, our credit is not going to flow to new productive industry. It's all going to go into things like windmills and solar and things that can run without using CO2. That restriction on our ability to produce energy is going to kill our economy and bring us down to the level that they can sustain worldwide, because the people in most of the world are nowhere near our level of living right now. But what we'll be seeing that we don't have the ability to do things like travel across the country for whenever we feel like it and things like that, because our energy demands are going to be actually lowered to a point where they can impose like a worldwide currency, a worldwide regimen of who gets what, and follow that totalitarian dream that really from way back to we've been studying the Fabian Society and the Rhodes Round Table and all this stuff. It's all connected. It's a nightmare that's unfolding if we don't stop it.
There's so many things. I think the thing that's going to take us out is going to be, like what took out the British Empire, that when the pound sterling crashed. I think what's going to take us out is the dollar's going to crash. And I tell you how I think that's going to happen. The US has turned into just this mad empire in so many ways, but one of them is sanctions. So what happens? We got to sanction everybody for everything. We're sanctioning, and then we just make up bull crap. Hey, you're did anybody tell you that Putin has a magic wand and he's turning Americans into frogs? That's all the intelligence community has to say. Putin's got a magic wand and he's turning intelligence. And you know what Joe Biden will say? Doggone it, we got to give him more sanctions. So they'll make just any country, that country there, they're doing something evil, to sanction them then. And I don't care, Democrat, Republican, whoever it is, AOC, you name it, they're going to say, yay, more sanctions for everybody. So what? And I've been saying for a while that's going to catch up on them. So here's something that's going on right now. China is saying we have to get more countries away from the dollar because of these sanctions. We have to get people out from under the US so that they can do business without sanctions. Russia said the same thing. So now Russia and China are going around the world talking to these countries that we are sanctioning. And they're working to build a group of countries that work outside of the dollar. They're calling it de-dollarization, right? And so there are enough reasons you could argue why the dollar would crash over the long run. But the fact of the matter is, we print all of this money. We don't really, it's actually not what we're really doing, but we create all of this money out of thin air, which, okay. And, as a result of creating all of this money, at this point, we haven't been experiencing inflation. And I believe, and a lot of economists will argue, well, the reason we've gotten away with it to this point is, and not that we'll get away with forever, but because the dollar's the world currency. If you have a closed system and you put a whole bunch of dollars in there, you're going to get immediate inflation. If you got an open system, it's like having an escape valve. So this money can go right out into the world, and we kind of can get away with it for a while. But the debt numbers are still there. However, what's going to happen when these countries get an alternative manner? You've got China's coming up with it. Instead of the petrodollar, it's called the petro yuan. And all of these countries start saying, you know what? This is great. And countries in Europe and Canada and even the US say, you know what? I'd love to do business in Venezuela and Iran and Russia and China and all these other places. All I got to do is work through this other monetary denomination other than the dollar, and I can do business with anybody I want. Eventually, people are going to feel like they use the dollar to beat everybody over the head with it. I'm done with that dollar. Our dollar is going to crash because of those sanctions at some point. And when they do, then that inflation hits, and that's when the empire falls apart. And that's what happens to a lot of empires. They overstretch themselves, they overreach themselves. And the other thing that happens is the people at home, they don't have food, they don't have butter, they don't have bread, they don't have gas, because all of that goes to those 800 bases and those ships and those people out there around the world and those countries that we're invading and fighting and all that kinds of stuff. And the people at home end up with nothing, which is what we're getting closer and closer to now. And then when the dollar crashes, people are like, wait a minute, I can't pay $25 for a pound of butter. And the government's like, well, our dollar ain't worth much, so you don't have a lot of other options.
There's so much there. And I agree with you about sanctions. And it's just another example of the John Foster Dulles policy that goes all the way back to the beginnings of the Cold War, when he said, you're either in with us or against us. And basically, better dead than red was a short way to put it. And any communist, it doesn't matter, woman, child, anybody that's a communist is. I mean, these people are coming out of World War II, and they had to kill a lot of people. And they're still thinking in terms of, hey, just kill them, get rid of them. That's what they did when the war was on. And, the war is over, technically over. I don't think it ever really ended in places like the Ukraine, where such atrocities were practiced on both sides, and the dismal way that human rights was just completely trashed, and you have almost that resentment that's still there with still using the same names for some of those armies that were absolutely committing the Holocaust. They
Yeah.
nothing less than that. These folks are absolutely committed. That blood and soil thing that comes from the Nazis, as you say, is still a major factor, and it's horrible. And I would love to think that it's just a European thing that we don't have to deal with, but we see it in places like the Charlottesville event of a few years ago, and that. That is the people. That's nothing that you and I can do about that. But hopefully, they among themselves within that in the Ukraine would, without foreign interference, would realize that, hey, okay, the war is over, and we are going to have to live together, and we're going to, put the guns down and help each other do some farming, and build some barns and whatever you have to do to help each other to get back to a civil coexistence. That can't happen when the great game is on between the Wall Street, city of London, and we now add Silicon Valley to this triumvirate
Berlin.
of yeah, and Berlin, yeah, Deutsche Bank, all of the powers that. Now, here's where I wanted to add my own interpretation of what's happened with regard to the dollar.
Hmm.
Is that, and I would say this with the English pound as well, when that happened, that these folks, these imperial bankers, do not think of the money in terms of having value. They think of it as just pieces of paper that eventually they're going to pull the money out of it. So when the dollar crashes, it's not going to hurt the bankers one bit. They will have diversified and
Yep.
put it in other places, and turn it into gold, or maybe buy some uranium futures in the bank in Kazakhstan. The real money goes into assets in times of strife, and they know that, and they've already got everything planned out so that when the dollar crashes, they will move it. I submit that they're not going to crash the dollar no matter how much we borrow, as long as we do their bidding, and that means push Russia up to war. That's what Biden is doing. Biden is doing this for the big banks, the international coterie of banks that consist, in my mind, of the empire. And as long as the empire is able to keep keep going, keep growing, keep pushing against a Russia, against a China, that it can still get the investments, that people will still believe in it, that people will still buy into their crazy schemes, whatever they are, derivatives, the computerized, crazy stuff. They'll buy it because they believe that eventually the empire is the winner. Now, if it turns out that the empire does win, if we suddenly got a call from Putin and the president of China saying, "Hey, we give up. We're gonna let the dollar reign, and we're gonna, all our banks are gonna go to Rothschild now, and we're gonna let everything be just as you want. That's when they crash the dollar, because that's when they no longer need American servicemen, American taxpayers, American voters to support their plans.
Yeah, there's so much in that, and I agree with you. Because there's so much going on here. The big thing to me about Russia and China is, and Iran and Venezuela. If you look at the countries that the U.S. is really at odds with, what do they have in common? And one of the things I think they all have in common is they're very independent, right? Countries, and they're very like, this is our culture, this is who we are. The Iranians are very proud of being Iranians, and they're very defiant. The Russians, they're like, we're Russians, this is the way we do things. They're orthodox. You know what I mean? They have their beliefs, and they ain't going to change them. This is who we are. The Chinese, oh, what a beautiful culture, the Zen and the Kung Fu and all the beautiful things. And they're like, bonsai trees. These are places, these are countries that have very old cultures. They're very proud of their culture. You know what I mean? I've been to Venezuela. Oh, the people are very proud. You go there, they got stuff painted all Viva Venezuela, Simon Bolivar. They go back, to the 1800s, 1700s, things that happened. And we were freed from the Spanish in this year, that year, stuff painted. Okay, these countries are independent. They believe in who they are. They love their culture. Not now, don't get me wrong. Unlike the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, they're not like, yeah, our culture is great, so we got to kill you. They're just like, this is who we are, this is our culture, and we're cool. We're chilling, dude. Stay away from us. Whereas the neoliberal warmongers, they're trying to meld everybody into one way of being that they want us all to be. You know what I mean? And we're all like a person like me, I'm like, I don't want to bother anybody. I want everybody to have their rights and be equal. Fine. You know what I mean? Allow me to be whatever I want. Don't question every word I say, that I have to, every tweet. There's a tweet. Oh, wait a minute. Is that offensive to a woman or a gay person or black? Do I have to go through that's what they're pushing towards, so they can use those kind of things to beat us up with, right? And to kind of keep us under control. And these independent countries that do their things their way, that aren't going to come under the control, they're not going to have their culture taken away from them by this neoliberal blob. That's unacceptable. We got to go there. We got to crush these, and we got to bring them under the blob. China and Russia both really have. While Russia is, in fact, has some of the neoliberal stuff a little bit, but it's really different. It really is an economy that is a very powerful central government, and that's part of both of them, very powerful central governments. And the neoliberals are trying to completely take away the parts of the government that regulate them, or that overlook them, or that would question them. They want to make them weaker, because they say they owe smaller government. No, they want the parts of the government that any watchdog, they want that gone. The other parts of the government where they're making all their money, they want to grow them. You know what I mean? It's just a fraud. It's just a self-serving racket there that they're working on. But it's interesting watching the countries that they want. They've got lots of resources. They got lots of labor. They got everything you'd want, and they want independence. They won't come under the blob. And so what do? This is the way it always works. The leader of their country, whoever he may be, is a dictator. It's always the leader of country X, and it could be our person. Oh, we love Joe Blow. Garland, he's a great leader of the country. And if they decide Garland ain't going along with him anymore, Garland's now, so the next day, well, that Garland's a dictator, and we got to come in and stand up for the people of his country and get him out of there, and we'll get our Exxon right in to pump all that fresh new oil that we've stolen out of the ground. It's pathetic. Everybody can see through it. I just think that even a lot of our allies are just like, how are we going to deal with this monster here? We're allied with them. They're too powerful to fight, but they're getting a little out of hand. And I think they don't know how to deal with us. And one last thing I'll say: do not underestimate this. Biden's team really does have lunatics. I know people who I've talked to who have dealt with some of these neocons. I'm telling you, some of these people, if you would know some of the things they've said and the way they act, Victoria Nuland, Avril Haines. I mean, these people are, I just think, sociopaths. I really believe that.
It goes along with the idea of depopulation and eugenics, which has been a very really big theme of my channel the past month or two, and we see it coming into the 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 culture from many angles, including the horrific idea that they might create uh, things that they put in vaccines that can actually sterilize human beings, and have been trying those over in Africa and other places, uh, just in order to depopulate the world to their benefit. And that is also, something that I keep an eye on. The news does not report on that, but I keep an eye on it, and it does look to me like that's part of the mix that is being propagated on us by the deep state blob. That they think there's too many of us, and they'd like to have us, you know, maybe a cool half a billion, or maybe 750 million. They don't like this 8 billion idea. It's just too many of us. You know how it is when you have a whole lot of money and you start getting afraid of crowds.
You ever see the old movies where there's like five guys that rob a bank and they got to split it five ways and they start looking at each other? They take one guy out. Okay, now we got to split it four, and it gets smaller and smaller till you're down to the last guy.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is we've gotten to a point. If you just watch the television and the news, it's all one. It's horrifying because okay, all this stuff came out. Venezuela's bad. Juan Guaido's really the president. All this bull crap, right? So I'm here in Maryland. I start seeing these things. Well, the federal government has said that Venezuela's seafood and Venezuela crab meat may be contaminated. Now, isn't it interesting that at exactly the same time the State Department saying Venezuela's terrible, they're horrible, and it's like, yeah, well, there's Venezuelan crab meat, Venezuela stuff comes from all over the world, and all of a sudden they think their products are bad. I mean, and I'm like, isn't it interesting? I was coming in one morning, and this was when things were still open. I was coming, I was driving to work, and there was something about, I was listening, and I just turned on, one of those morning goofy talk shows, you know what I mean, where they're talking, one that my daughter would listen to with the silly guys that are having fun. And I'm flipping around for whatever reason. I had that channel on, and they're like making propaganda. This is a morning zoo kind of show, and they're like making propaganda comments about like Venezuela or Iran, and I'm like, when did we get to the point where we were getting neocon war propaganda in the morning when some schmuck is supposed to be just making making jokes and off-color remarks that he can barely get away with without being censored by the FCC, getting his toes like the grease man and people used to do, or Howard Stern, okay, fine, do that stuff, get in trouble or whatever. But now we got to get war propaganda with a cup of coffee trying to drive to work in the morning. This whole system, the movies, television, all of it, it's just like a big giant, it's as you said, it's Orwellian.
Well, you used to call it neocons, but the people that are occupying all the offices would call themselves liberals, and we've used the term earlier, neoliberals. But I think what we really are looking at is both sides of the aisle joining together in a much older political idea, which is called fascism.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. There's different kinds of fascism. There's the authoritarian. There's different types of authoritarian. To me, there's a direct authoritarian fascism. It's just like, you will do what I say or else you get shot. There's another one, and I think this is the kind of fascism we're seeing now, and that is one that's a manipulative fascism. I'm going to come up. I'm always going to pretend that I'm doing this for moral and ethical reasons, but I'm still going to control you. I'm still going to control your speech. I'm still going to, encroach upon all of your civil rights and your civil liberties. But I'm going to say, and isn't it like, again, doesn't it always get like our foreign policy? We say we've got to invade country X for the right, so their people will have democracy, or so they'll have a good life, whatever, right? It's a lie. And then they say to us, yeah, we've got to throw all of these people who don't believe like us off of Twitter and social media and everything, so that we won't have a disruptive society. It's always for a good reason they're doing it. But now, basically, I've been saying for so many years, don't ignore foreign policy. It's going to come home. And now this war on terror is coming home. They're like, well, the terrorists are here now and we got to bring the war on terror home. You know what that means? So what do they do to the people at a war on terror? And they'll find a means to do it here. It's an excuse for oppression and repression of the American people, of our voices, of our ability to communicate, particularly people like you and me, of our ability to dissent against things that we don't believe in, all of it. We're terrorists.
Well, let's not go that far. I think the pen has always been mightier than the sword, and I think that you and I are absolutely nonviolent in what we're doing. But I think we're doing the best that we possibly can to use that pen and to use that digital version of the pen to communicate, like an old common sense pamphlet that circulated among 2 or 3 million people, and suddenly there was a groundswell for revolution. It's like the other side of the power of the pen, where you have a William Randolph Hearst who through his power could cause ships to sail against foreign countries in war, and to take over those countries and exploit the resources. The way that of controlling people through banking has been laid out in many ways. The whole Rothschild system of fractional reserve banking, and the power that can be multiplied, the multiplier effect of that gives whoever controls the banks the power to invest that money into a massive military machine. And you could take that machine and then go take over another country. And that's what, the William Randolph Hearst idea is yeah, they got a lot of good stuff in Hawaii. Let's get it. There's stuff in the Philippines. Let's get it. The idea of pure unbridled capitalism versus the idea of a government that is proactive and does things for the people has been the struggle between two major powerful schools of economics: the Keynesians that say the government is the answer to everything, and so let's just borrow some more money from Rothschild and the banks and spend it, which is what we're doing now. This is what Biden's doing now. He's just keeping everything going by borrowing, spend, keep the people happy, and that's the Keynesian thing. The opposite of that is to say, no, you don't get anything. We're going to have pure whatever the traffic will bear. And that's what we do to the foreign countries. We say, we're not going to let you have anything. As a matter of fact, we're going to sanction you. We're going to make our life as hard as we possibly can for you. And that way we're going to control you. But either way, the government controls, and either way, the population it loses all its wealth and gradually loses its freedom.
Yeah, I got an article right here. This is from PBS. Here's an example. This is from PBS. I think the day is March 20th. It looks like 2020. Now listen to this. So there was all this talk about right now, what are we going to do? How are they going to help people out? Are they going to do 1.9 trillion? Oh, that's too much. Oh, that's too little, right? Here's what this article says. It's on PBS. Federal Reserve to lend additional $1 trillion a day to large bank. I'm looking at it right now. PBSnews.org, right? Federal Reserve to lend additional $1 trillion per day. So let me try to get this out of the way so I can look at it. It won't let me. Whatever the case may be, the New York Federal Reserve Bank said it will offer $1 trillion of overnight loans a day through the end of this month to large banks. This is in addition to $1 trillion on 14-day loans it is offering every week. Most Americans have no clue. So when they're like, hey, 1.9 trillion, oh, Biden's doing 1.9 trillion for people. Oh, Americans, oh, the American Savior Act or whatever that bloody hell it is. So 1.9 trillion is too much for the little people. They're giving those suckers $1 trillion a day on top of $1 trillion a week. So that 1.9 trillion that's supposed to help us out for the next year and plus cover the last year. They're doing that a week to the banks, a week. And if you think that's a loan, anybody who thinks that is a loan is out of their mind. That ain't no loan. They're going to give them the $2 trillion a week. And now recently it was up that they were doing, I think it's 120 billion a month now. But think about that. So they were at that point, they were doing 2 trillion a week. Now 120 billion a month, which is, $1.5 trillion or something a year. They're throwing trillion. There it is. They're throwing trillions a day to us. So it's like they tell people you can get 2,000. We're going to give you $2,000. People say, yay, 2,000, we'll take it. And then it's, well, we're going to knock that down to 1,400. They're squabbling for $600 for the average American. $1 trillion a day. And if you look at that article, it's on top of the 1 trillion a week they're giving. And it loan my behind. They ain't loaning them. The Federal Reserve isn't doing any loans. The people who run the Federal Reserve, they come from Wall Street. And when they leave, they all go back and forth. So they're just taking care of themselves. It's pathetic. People don't understand the kind of numbers we're looking at. $1 trillion a day. If you do that for 1 month, $30 trillion plus an additional trillion a week. $34 trillion. That's real money there. But they got nothing for us. We can't fix anything for us. We don't deserve it. All that just goes to the super rich.
Right, because if we had any money, then we might actually invest in things and create our own money and actually become competitive with some of their overextended super corporations. And they can't have that. We are not allowed to, have small businesses anymore that might possibly grow into medium-sized businesses, and then maybe take a little market share from the great cartels that have been formed to serve the empire's needs. It's what it's all about. Let's all vote for sovereignty, but let's recognize that while we're talking sovereignty, they're talking empire, and they are working day and night to impose it upon every one of us on the planet. Not just Americans, not just Venezuelans, not just Russians. They want everybody to be under their thumb and under their surveillance. And, if we can't prove that we're making them some kind of profit, then they'll take that as a sign that they are free to get rid of us whenever they want to. That's the way they look at it. The more I study, the more I realize we are facing people who have no concept of empathy or sympathy for their fellow humans. They don't even consider us to be fellow humans anymore. They've separated.
Well, I mean, and here's the example. They'll go to this country A or B and they'll overthrow the country, and hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people will die. They don't even care. Syria, 700,000 people died. They don't even blink an eye. Well, we've got to work for the Syrian people. Well, you killed half of them, for God's sake. But here's the thing about it. If you think about it, the concept, some people call it neoliberalism, some people call it globalism. But if you think about it, that runs parallel with empire. You know what I mean? Because the U.S. empire is about what? It's about taking over there's only two kinds of countries that we have already conquered and countries that we intend to conquer. It's about taking over the countries and then not having any borders for economic borders. You know what I mean? So now the billionaires, the super rich oligarchs can have their money. They can move it to, just in the same way that they'll move to the cheapest state or the cheapest. So they can move their money. They can move their assets to wherever most benefits them in the world. And they can make it from the wealthier countries, and then they can store it in the countries that are compromised, and then they can get more and more power. So this whole empire thing, and then a perfect example again, you go back to Ukraine. A perfect example is the empire, right? The U.S. overthrows the government of Ukraine. Joe Biden goes in, he brings his son, and they start cleaning them out. He brings his son, hey, there's money to be made here, son. Go help yourself. I'm running this country now. So they come in, and they come in the countries. That's globalism. We overthrew a country. All right, let's get in here and get this money. And that's what they do. That's globalism. It's just neoconservative, which usually means to me the militaristic part of globalism, right? Neoliberalism, you're talking more the economic part of globalism. It's all just globalism. It's let's take over the world and and let me add this. Last thing I'll say then about this. It always, empire benefits the super wealthy, the super oligarchs. Who made out from the British Empire? The Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, the West Indian Tea Company, you know what I mean? The owners of these super mega companies, the ones that forced people to grow opium so they could sell it, force it on other countries, right? So the few oligarchs, the lords and nobility in the British Empire were cleaning up. Meanwhile, they would take the poor schmuck on the street, they'd throw him on a ship and they'd send him over to Africa to get killed while he was conquering a country. So we're cannon fire fodder, but an empire only serves a very small amount of people, and it sucks the life out of the population. It sucks them finances. It throws them on battlefields to be slaughtered and be cannon fodder. The empire, we're nothing but an expendable asset to the empire. That's what Americans, what people have to understand. They're not working on that. They're working on behalf of a small group of people.
Yeah, and if we talked American history, then people would know the resonant phrase "free trade and sailors' rights," which was the phrase flown on the American warships in World War II and adopted as a slogan for a number of presidential campaigns. What it meant was, okay, free trade is what we want for our ports so that we can have an economy, but sailors' rights. That means you can't impress guys off American ships, British Navy. You just can't do that. We're going to kick your ass if you do that. And we went out there and we kicked their ass. And they don't impress guys off American ships anymore. Well, that's kind of what I think we need to get back to is the idea that, hey, we are different. We are not going to be your slaves. We are Americans, and we stick out for each other, whether we are the president or the lowest sailor on deck. You cannot impress our sailors. We are free men. That's what I think we need to say.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And people have to keep their eyes out, open. People have to learn. People have to understand that, this mainstream media that we have is just highly compromised. It's become nothing but a public relations operation for the intelligence communities and these oligarchs, and it's garbage. It's worse than garbage, because if you watch it, it's not that they don't just lie to you. They deliberately deceive and mislead you and try to take you down a road where you will work against your own interests. And sadly, we see too many people in this country working against their own interests, and they've created these red and blue, they're like cults now, and they just just fight amongst each other. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me, yeah, these people were like, oh well, I don't associate with Trump supporters. And I'm like, well, first of all, Trump's out of office. What are you even talking about Trump supporters? He's not even the president anymore. But people have just lost their minds. They've just fallen into cults. I don't know what to say.
Well, what I can say is folks, stick with Garland Nixon if you want to get the truth. Let's make sure and ask you, Garland, to let us know where else we can find Garland Nixon besides here on Monday nights at McDuff Lives.
Sure. Follow me at Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland Nixon on Facebook, Garland.Nixon on Instagram, email garlandin@gmail.com, Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 6 to 8 p.m., the critical hour, and every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Pacifica Radio. I do a show called News Views, and I just talk to some people. I might have another show in another city in the U.S., hopefully shortly. Further west.
Well, it's our privilege to have you here at McDuff Lives, Garland. Next week, I'll be off recharging my batteries, and we'll see you in 2 weeks from tonight, right back here with McDuff and Nixon Monday night. Thanks, everyone.